Taoiseach in his closing remarks articulated a desire that all of us have, is that towards a just and sustainable peace in Israel and Palestine, particularly for the Palestinian people. The events in Jenin on the 3rd, 4th and 5th of July make that goal, which was already so far distant, even further away. Because this is an escalation in this conflict that we haven't seen in probably 20 years. This is not a continuation of the existing oppressive security activity or the attacks that Israel have been carrying out on the Palestinian people. This is a marked escalation. This is one now with a combination of factors that exist, with the most right-wing government we've seen in Israel in many, many years, with a Palestinian Authority that is losing the respect of young people in areas like Jenin and Nablus in the West Bank, with the policy of the expansion of the occupied territories and the displacement of the Palestinian people, with these intense barrages that we saw in Jenin and in the refugee camp. It's a clear message from Israel that if the Palestinian people of Jenin and of the West Bank, that if they don't move, if they don't become displaced, that what we will see is the Gazification of the West Bank and cities like Jenin and Nablus. That is the control and suppression of a population of people in a besieged environment, such as exists in Gaza. We are in a very, very worrying space, and the eyes of the world seem to be diverted. It is no coincidence that Israel carried out these attacks in Jenin on the 3rd, 4th and 5th of July, when the eyes of the United States, its biggest ally, would have been focused domestically on its own Independence Day celebrations. This is something the Israelis are dab hands at doing when they are carrying out such attacks over many, many decades. Obviously, in our region, the Ukraine and Russian war is taking up an awful lot of our attention. So Israel are the past masters of identifying moments in the geopolitical calendar for which they can carry out their most egregious attacks. This has been one of them, but it is one that isn't just going to hang over those few days. It's one that has changed the security environment and the outlook of the region. The killing of innocents, the destruction of homes, the destruction of infrastructure, the besieging of refugee camps, of towns, of cities. We could be on the brink of what could be the third intifada. This is where we're at this time. And still, Europe continues its policy of what has to be said, almost a benign approach to the activities of Israel. Now, I do acknowledge that politics in Ireland and political parties and indeed the government, there is a conformity to our position on this, more or less. But we continue to meet at Europe actors that do turn a blind eye to the oppression of the Palestinian people and are continuing to do so. And this is something that Ireland needs to continue to fight against in Europe, and we have measures that we can implement. We have the illegal Israeli settlements divestment bill from Sinn Féin, which could be passed rather than being postponed. We have the Occupied Territories Bill. These are things that we can bring in, that we should pass. The Irish money that's funding the apartheid regime, the National Treasury Management Agency investing through the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund in 9 Israeli companies, including 4 banks that operate in illegal Israeli settlements. Banks in which the ISIF is invested provide direct financing to Israeli construction, infrastructure and maintenance projects being undertaken on land expropriated or, in less diplomatic terms, stolen from the Palestinian people. Meanwhile, the other businesses operating in these areas provide revenue and economic visibility to settlement municipalities, which help to sustain the illegal Israeli occupation of Palestine. The ISIF is funded by taxpayers' money, Irish taxpayers' money, and we then become de facto investors in financing and sustaining apartheid. That is in total contravention to the words that the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Taoiseach, has read out, and it is in total contravention to the political will of this House and of the Irish people. Our own history of colonialism gives us a unique position to be somewhat of an ethical arbitrator on this issue within Europe. But when our own wealth funds are acting the way they are, it absolutely discredits any stance we can have to be ethical arbitrators on this issue. I want to talk about the issue of workers' rights in Israeli settlements. We've just, prior to the attacks on Jenin, there was a high-level delegation from the Irish Congress of Trade Unions to Palestine to acknowledge the contribution that Irish trade unionists have had throughout the region. I think one of the participants, Phil Nihey from the INMO, said the contribution of Irish trade unionists and nurses to various health facilities throughout Palestine has been really impressive. And that we will be looking to deepen these connections. These are the actions of NGOs and civil society that the Taoiseach spoke about. This is them in practice. That Ireland has to recognise the Palestinian state, that it would offer real hope for the people, that as they are watching other events like the Ukraine war push Palestine down the priority list for the international community, that we in Ireland will not allow that to happen. There is a two-tiered legal system of workers' rights at play in the Israeli settlements, in which Palestinian workers do not enjoy the same rights and protections as Israeli settlers. We've known this for a long time. In order to work in settlements, Palestinians must obtain a permit from Israeli authorities, and it's worth emphasising that, that this is land, that means Palestinian people need permission from their own occupiers to work on their own land, that the Irish government themselves have agreed in statements has been stolen from them. These permits can be annulled at any time, including and especially when Palestinian workers demand their rights, try to organise, try to unionise and try to engage in any political activity. This, again, is something we need to call out. And in the short time I have left, I just want to acknowledge one thing and to come back to the security element. We don't know what's ahead, but it does look bleak. And we do know that in 2008, in Ireland, when Minister Micheál Martin was Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Convention on Cluster Munitions was signed in this very city. The Convention itself was prompted by Israel's use of cluster munitions in the 2006 war with Hezbollah in the Lebanon. It is understood and accepted by any reasonable person on this globe that cluster munitions are one of the worst weapons. There's no such thing as an ethical weapon, but these are one of the worst in their indiscriminate manner and their ability to kill innocent civilians. The signing of that convention in Dublin on 30th May 2008 was another landmark in our own proud history of promoting disarmament. There's no doubt about that. And since then, 111 states have ratified the convention. Of the states that haven't, there are 4: Israel, the United States, Russia, and indeed Ukraine. And if I may say that the recent reports of the United States sending cluster munitions to Ukraine to fight against the Russians, and we know already that the Russians have been using them and that Ukraine used them, that this has to be called out for what it is, and we need to call on the United States, who we call as an ally. We had their president sitting here not a couple of months ago. That this is something that Ireland will not stand for. We didn't stand for it in 2006 when Israel used it on Hezbollah in Lebanon. We will never stand for the use of cluster munitions in any setting. We do not stand for it when we see Russians using it on Ukraine, and we should not stand for it when we see Ukraine using it in the war. And we need an unequivocal call for that from our government on those use. This is our convention. We developed it, and if it's to go anywhere, we need to be calling it out when we see it, no matter which side are using them. It's absolutely unethical. I am deeply concerned of where we're going in Israel-Palestine, and I'm concerned that Ireland's words and our government's words that we say here, and indeed the words that we do bring to EU, aren't being heard. We have tools, we have bills that we can bring in. Please activate them. Please improve and be stronger to protect the Palestinian people who are living in an apartheid state, and their vista over the next weeks, months and years is looking incredibly dark and incredibly grim. Thank you.